My mother once told me, "Not everyone is meant to be exceptional, sweetheart." That was the day they stopped asking who I became. The words had been spoken over coffee, lightly, almost lovingly, like a kindness. I was 19 then, in my first winter break from West Point. The uniform still held the starch of pride. She said it after hearing I wouldn't be home for Christmas because of a last-minute assignment. I think she meant to make me feel better. She didn't know it would echo like a verdict. In this family, ambition wasn't questioned, but mine was always considered a detour. I didn't leave West Point because I failed. I left because I was recruited, handpicked actually, by a program that doesn't officially exist. No ceremony, no photos, no medals for mom to post on Facebook. Just one-way tickets to cities that never make tourist lists. For the past 2 decades, I've lived on the edge of history. I've written battle doctrine that won't be declassified until I'm dead. I've been in rooms where the lights flicker because they don't trust bulbs not made in America. But to my family, I simply vanished. They stopped asking where I was. Maybe it was easier that way. Outside my window, Arlington's winter pushed against the glass. Pale frost laced the corners. The radiator clanked like a reluctant heartbeat in the wall. My apartment was modest, lived in but impersonal. 1 bookshelf, 2 chairs, no visitors. On the table sat a single postcard. My mother's handwriting hadn't changed in 20 years, just 4 lines. "Jackson will be pinned next week. You should come. Please don't wear anything weird. You know how important this is. Mom." Not a, "Hope you're well." Not a, "We'd love to see you." Just an instruction, a summons. I turned it over. No return address, just the embossed seal of Fort Liberty and the military insignia etched in blue. It was the same base my father had retired from, the same base I left behind without ceremony. And now Jackson, my baby brother, would wear the rank they once said I could never earn. I walked over to the closet I barely opened. In the far back, beneath a gray garment bag, was the only piece of my past I hadn't burned or boxed away. I pulled it down slowly. The fabric was still stiff, the seams crisp with silence. My old uniform, dress blues. Every inch of it intact, except for the time. The brass buttons still gleamed like defiance. The ribbons slept in a side pouch, untouched. I laid it on the bed. The apartment felt too quiet. I reached under the nightstand and retrieved a shoebox. Inside was a photo, creased at the edges, yellowing. A 4th of July barbecue long ago. Everyone was there. My father holding a tray of burgers, my mother laughing beside Jackson and the neighbors' kids. And me, well, what remained of me. I had been cropped out. You could still see my hand resting on the bench, the outline of my left shoulder. They said the frame had been too small. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at that photo longer than I should have. My chest felt tight, not from grief, just from the sharp awareness of being intentionally erased. I stood. I took the uniform off the hanger and stepped into it slowly. The fabric remembered. It fit my frame like an old promise. I buttoned it to the collar, tightened the cuffs, and finally met my reflection. The mirror didn't blink. Neither did I. Years of silence looked back at me, the jaw a little sharper, the eyes a little more hollow, but not broken. Let's see if ghosts can walk through the front door. I unbuttoned the jacket, folded it precisely as I'd been taught, slid it gently into the valise. On top, I placed the photo. Not to provoke. Just to carry the last piece of proof that I had once existed in the frame. The zipper closed with a soft finality. There was no farewell to give. No one would miss me from this apartment. The walls would simply forget my breath. The windows would fog and clear without notice. But I wasn't going back for them. I was going back to be seen. Truly. Finally. Not as a myth, not as a mistake. as Maddie Grant, the woman they cut out of the picture. She's coming home. No one met me at the gate, not even a glance from the MP, like I didn't exist. I gave my ID anyway. The young soldier barely looked up as he scanned it. His eyes passed over my name without flicker. "Proceed," he said, already turning to the next car. "No, ma'am. No welcome back. Just air." The road into Fort Liberty hadn't changed. Same sharp turns. Same endless chain-link fences topped with tired barbed wire. On the left, a row of flags flapped in rhythm. Symbols of valor, of legacy. I used to believe I belonged among them. I parked by the logistics unit's fence. The gravel crunched beneath my boots, louder than I remembered. My breath fogged briefly in the winter air before fading into nothing, like me. At the front door, I didn't knock. I still had a key. Inside, the house smelled like lemon polish and old ambition. My mother was at the dining table arranging name cards like she was commanding a battlefield. She didn't look up. "Go change your shirt," she said flatly. "You and Jackson will sit next to each other. Just don't interrupt his speech tomorrow." There it was. Not a hug, not a hello. Just immediate course correction. Like I'd shown up wearing disgrace instead of cotton. "I didn't know there was a dress code," I said mildly, peeling off my coat. "There is," she said. "Respect." I held her gaze. It didn't waver. But behind it, something flinched. Like she wasn't talking to me, but to the version of me she wished existed. Jackson made his entrance 20 minutes later, all polished bars and movie star posture. His uniform was immaculate. He swept across the room like royalty, kissing hands and dropping compliments like confetti. "Mads," he said brightly when he spotted me. "Didn't know you'd make it." Before I could reply, he turned to the guests. "This is my sister. She used to work in admin at the VA, I think." Something like that. Something like that. There was polite laughter. Soft, harmless, the kind that cuts deepest. One woman leaned toward me. "So, you wore the uniform too?" Her tone held genuine surprise, like she'd asked if I'd once been a magician or a rock climber. I didn't answer. I just smiled. Not wide enough to show teeth. Just enough to let it end there. Later, as the guests buzzed about appetizers and legacy, I slipped into the hallway. The walls were a shrine, graduation portraits, framed commendations, plaques of service. My brother as cadet. My father in flight gear. Even a black and white photo of my grandfather shaking hands with a senator. I kept walking. One frame caught my eye. Familiar. A family photo from 2004. I remembered the day it was taken. It used to include me, on the left, beside my mother. But now that space was blank. Just a patch of beige wallpaper behind a glass pane. They hadn't replaced me. They had erased me. I went upstairs to the guest room, the one with the twin bed and the cheap desk lamp. On the pillow was a folded card. "Welcome, Madison," it said. Typed. Generic. I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling while the sound of laughter drifted up from downstairs. By morning, the house buzzed with preparation. Silver polish, flag folding, speech rehearsals. I stayed mostly invisible, carefully, silently, just like they preferred. At brunch, Jackson raised his glass. "Tomorrow's not just a ceremony," he said. "It's a turning point. A grant is stepping into national strategy." The applause was automatic. I didn't move. I stared at my glass of orange juice. It trembled slightly in my hand. And for the first time since I'd returned, I realized something. They hadn't just forgotten me. They had rewritten the story to make sure I never existed in it. The seat card said, "Family," but I was assigned to Overflow, Row 3, unranked. The printed label sat stiffly on a folding chair next to an overperfumed colonel's wife and a finance officer's teenage son. I stared at it for a moment before sitting down. The irony wasn't lost on me. Unranked. Not even anonymous. Just irrelevant. Rows of seats filled the event hall in neat symmetry. Flags framed the stage like stage props. Light jazz played from hidden speakers, trying and failing to make the military feel warm. The room smelled of waxed wood and old velvet. From my seat, the podium looked like a distant border checkpoint. Official. Impenetrable. Across the room, I spotted Jackson near the refreshments. He was charming an admiral's aide and a group of sharply dressed civilians, likely from the think tank circuit. My mother stood nearby, supervising like a campaign manager. She wore a gray dress suit. Sharp lines, no softness. I recognized that silhouette. It had never bent, even when I shipped out the first time. I glanced around for my name on the main seating chart again. Still nothing. I wasn't surprised. A young officer slid into the seat beside me, glancing at my uniform blazer folded neatly over my lap. "Ma'am," he said hesitantly, "were you, medical corps? You look familiar." "Something like that," I said. He smiled awkwardly, then pretended to be absorbed in his program. A small hand tugged at my sleeve. I turned to see a little girl, maybe 6, maybe 7, staring up at me with wide eyes and cotton candy breath. "Did you ever shoot a real gun?" she asked, eyes bright with possibility. I crouched a little, lowering my voice. "Sweetheart, I once wrote a plan that helped 30 people make it home alive. That's better than any shot I've ever taken." She blinked, then ran off toward the dessert table. No one commented. The adults who overheard simply shifted the conversation back to budget allocations and upcoming deployments. I leaned back and exhaled slowly. Still a ghost, apparently. A burst of laughter erupted from the front row. Jackson again. He was telling a story, something about leading a recon unit through a blizzard simulation. The room listened like it was war poetry. A woman to my left leaned in. "He's got presence," she whispered. "Makes you feel like you've known him for years." "I have," I replied. She didn't catch the tone. I reached for the glass of water in front of me. As I did, my eyes drifted across the far wall. Portraits of decorated officers, past honorees of the Strategic Initiative series. My father's face was there. Jackson's name was already etched onto a brass plate beneath the next frame. My space? Still empty. Or rather, never considered. A movement caught my attention. A junior officer, tall, nervous, clutching a program too tightly, approached my row. "Sorry," he said, almost tripping over his words. "This might sound strange, but are you Maddie Grant? From Torchlight?" I blinked. That name hadn't been said aloud in almost 15 years. Before I could answer, someone called his name from across the room. He straightened, mumbled an apology, and vanished into the crowd. I smiled, not out of pride, but out of habit. Then I whispered, just loud enough for the table linen to hear. "Still a ghost, apparently." The room stood when General Markham walked in. But he didn't stop at the podium. He walked straight to me. His presence cut through the air like a flag unfurling mid-battle. Boots polished to mirror finish, bars sharp against the midnight blue of his dress uniform. Conversations ceased before his footsteps did. The symphony of metals, heels, and breathlessness played just for him. I had no reason to expect this. From my seat, still labeled Overflow, I watched the man who once coordinated Eastern Theater logistics with me in a bunker outside Kabul. Last time I saw him, we were arguing about black site evac routes. He was formidable then. He was mythic now. I started to stand out of reflex. But before I could rise, he was already there. Square shoulders, steel spine, steady gaze locked onto mine. Then he saluted. Not the perfunctory kind, not a nod. A full textbook, field-perfect salute delivered like a command to the air. "Ma'am," he said, voice even, deep, clear. "General Grant, an honor to see you again." The room froze. Jackson, halfway through a sentence about family integrity and duty, stopped mid-breath. My mother dropped her water glass. It hit the carpet like a gunshot, muffled but unignorable. My father stood halfway, as if caught between reflex and denial. General Markham didn't flinch, and neither did I. I stood slowly, not rushed, not dramatic, just deliberate. I returned the salute, exactly as it was given. No more, no less. The silence in the room wasn't awkward. It was stunned. Not just at what was unfolding, but what it meant for everything they thought they knew. A few heads turned sharply. I heard the rustle of a program being crumpled, unintentionally. Somewhere in the second row, a junior lieutenant mumbled something, then fell quiet again. From the podium, Jackson's mouth was still slightly open. A flicker of something crossed his face. Recognition, maybe. Or fear. Markham lowered his hand, nodded once, and proceeded to the stage as if nothing unusual had happened. But the room didn't recover as easily. I sat again. I didn't need a spotlight. I had just reset the gravity of the room. The ceremony continued in technical terms. Announcements, commendations, rank affirmations. But the cadence was broken. Like someone had dropped a stone into still water and now all the reflections were rippling wrong. Every time I shifted slightly, I felt eyes. Not hostile, not admiring, just recalculating. Joanne stared forward, spine rigid, jaw locked, her knuckles whitened around her program, as if willing it to rewrite itself. Richard didn't look at me, he looked through me. Or rather, through the version of me he had installed in his memory. The dropout, the disappointment, the vanished. Jackson tried to regain control as he wrapped up his speech. "Legacy isn't something you're born into," he said, voice tightened, tone clipped. "It's something you build through discipline, integrity, and the choices you make when no one's watching." The irony hung in the air like smoke. Then someone behind me whispered, barely audible, but sharp as flint. "That's her? The ghost commander from Dagger? You let me stand up there like a fool," Jackson hissed, cornering me at the exit. "Was that your plan?" The hallway outside the reception hall was dim, half lit by overhead fixtures struggling to keep up with aging bulbs. Distant voices echoed from the main chamber, thinning as guests began to disperse. But here, in this narrow corridor of polished stone and years of buried expectations, my brother looked ready to explode. "I didn't let you do anything," I said, calm. "You spoke." I stood up. His jaw clenched. "You could have told me. You should have said something before tonight." I shrugged. "If your reputation can't survive my silence, maybe it's not as solid as you thought." His breath hitched, then steadied, sharpened like a scalpel. "Don't do that. Don't twist this. You made me look like an idiot." "You did that all by yourself," I replied. "I didn't ask General Markham to salute me. I didn't ask the room to fall quiet. That was gravity, Jackson, not a performance." From the corner of my eye, I caught movement. Joanne, our mother. She stood half-shielded behind a column of shadow, arms folded, expression unreadable. She didn't interrupt. Of course not. She never did when it mattered. Jackson followed my gaze, then looked away quickly. He stepped closer. "I spent years building this career. Clean record, impeccable evaluations. And now, this? You think walking in and stealing the spotlight makes up for... what? Disappearing?" I stared at him. Not with anger, just clarity. "You're angry because you built your story on the assumption I was gone, that I didn't matter. And now you're realizing the foundation isn't as solid as you thought." His nostrils flared. I stepped past him, slow, deliberate. My whole life I was told not to stand out. That if I couldn't be the best in their way, I should stay invisible. So I did. I vanished right in front of them. And now, all I did was stand up, and it made the whole room tilt. He didn't follow. He didn't reply. But Joanne did move. Not toward me. Just one step out of the shadows. Her eyes met mine. Briefly. No approval. No apology. Just recognition. And that, strangely, was enough for tonight. I headed toward the stairwell, away from the polished halls and champagne chatter. A young officer passed me on the landing, phone in hand, muttering something about a data alert. I kept walking. Back in the guest quarters, the room smelled faintly of industrial detergent and something burnt into the carpet years ago. I tossed my blazer over the chair, sat on the edge of the narrow bed, and opened my phone. A message waited. Priority clearance, flagged red. Security, alert. Confidential breach, level 2. Operation Torchlight, accessed via account, M. Grant timestamp, 1842, EST source, unknown, base IP traceable to Fort Liberty. I stared at the screen. The date matched tonight. The hour matched the moment I stood up. Not an accident. Not a coincidence. Someone was trying to finish what they started years ago. Someone was reaching back into classified darkness to scrub me from history once and for all. I gripped the phone tighter, my pulse suddenly louder than the room's buzz. Someone's not done trying to erase me. They called it a system anomaly. But anomalies don't target specific ghosts. The Strategic Command Center at Fort Liberty didn't look like a place that tolerated ghosts. Bright LED grids washed the walls in a clinical blue glow. Dozens of personnel moved in synchronized bursts, keyboards clacking, data streams cascading across enormous vertical screens. A low hum filled the room, vibrating like a held breath waiting to snap. I stood in the back, out of uniform now, my presence acknowledged but not embraced. General Markham's voice cut through the tension. "General Grant," he said, nodding once. "Appreciate you coming in." I said nothing, just stepped forward. Across the briefing table sat two men in dark gray suits, the kind issued more by clearance than by rank. Military Intelligence Command. Cold eyes, closed postures. "Walk us through the last 48 hours, one said. I did. Clean. Factual. No defensiveness. When I finished, the older of the two leaned forward. "The data breach originated from an inactive credential associated with your clearance, tied to Operation Torchlight. You admit to authoring that operation's core logistics?" I nodded. "Yes." "And yet, you deny leaking it?" "I don't deny," I said. "I request the tools to prove it." A beat of silence. The younger one scoffed lightly. "Excuse me? I want full access to Fort Liberty's mission logs, dormant servers, local network metadata, and the audit trail for all flagged anomalies over the last 90 days. That's not procedure." I folded my arms. I'm not asking for procedure. I'm invoking Section 17B of the Strategic Reserve Act. I'm still listed as active reserve, Special Intelligence Class. That grants me temporary investigative authority during internal breach scenarios. That got their attention. Even Markham blinked. No one had cited that clause in a decade. Most officers didn't even remember it existed. Markham cleared his throat. "She's right." The gray suits exchanged a look. Equal parts disbelief and resentment. "Very well," the older one muttered. "You'll coordinate with internal IT, but oversight remains with us." "Of course," I said. "Let's begin immediately." Within the hour, a temporary task force was formed, and just like that, the past returned in uniform. Richard Grant, my father, was assigned as consultant on campaign archives. Retirement hadn't fully severed his clearance, and he knew how to navigate military record crypts better than anyone. Jackson, my brother, was assigned to monitor internal personnel logs. He kept his gaze low, avoiding mine like I carried radiation. And Joanne, my mother, was quietly listed under forensic support, owing to her old training in combat medical analysis and trauma systems. She said nothing during the meeting. But she looked at me differently now. Not warmer, just sharper. The screen flickered red again as the first datasets came in. I stood in front of the main interface, calling for system-level metadata retrieval. Start with anomaly traces tied to decommissioned hardware, I instructed. Any ghost pings. I want access logs, encrypted redundancy servers, and cold storage nodes, especially anything abandoned after 2017. The IT staff hesitated. Ma'am, the 2017 logs were archived and deleted per... Not deleted. I cut in. Decommissioned. Pull them. Use a clean shell. They obeyed. 15 minutes in, the first irregularity surfaced. A ping from a backup relay node, server 3AB, listed as cold since mid-2017. It shouldn't have had access to anything past 2019. But the trail was clear. It had been quietly reactivated, then accessed with an override credential. Mine. Or at least, something wearing my name. I drilled into the access logs. Something about the command string looked familiar. A compressed folder, dated last week, encrypted, not standard protocol. And inside it, I froze. The report, my report, from Torchlight. Except I never submitted it through digital channels. It was written in longhand, transcribed once, then destroyed under security protocol. Only 3 people ever saw the original. Myself, a field analyst from Stuttgart, and a junior officer assigned as protocol witness. A formality. I opened the encrypted version. Every paragraph, every line, identical. Down to my annotations in the margins. Whoever pulled this had either access to physical documents long buried, or they were one of the 3. I recognized the phrasing, line by line, because I'd written it, once in a war bunker never meant for public eyes. The syntax was mine, the abbreviations, the cold detachment. You can always tell your own voice when it echoes back with malicious intent. The report wasn't just stolen. It had been dissected, repackaged. A handful of lines lifted directly, twisted just enough to look suspicious. Like someone had tried to provoke a scandal without understanding the weight of what they were playing with. I sat alone in the decommissioned data relay room. Once a nerve center, now a graveyard for forgotten servers and dust-thick consoles. The hum of the emergency power unit flickered on and off behind the walls, giving the space a pulse like a dying animal. I didn't mind the dark. I'd worked in worse. The base technician assigned to assist me stood uneasily in the corner. Ma'am, are you sure this is where you want to look? This sector's off the audit grid. Exactly, I said. That's why it matters. I ran another trace command. The server responded, slowly, reluctantly. Beneath layers of archived code and compressed command logs, a path opened up. An email packet, forwarded through a masked relay system, originally composed using an unregistered credential. I decrypted it. The header looked familiar, too familiar. It was the exact wording from the anonymous accusation posted on the Fringe blog 3 weeks ago, the one that tried to ruin my name. Only this time, buried in the metadata, was the smoking gun, a segment hash that matched a draft I'd once written in Stuttgart. That draft had only existed in 2 places, my hands and the locked bin that shredded it the next day. Unless someone made a copy. I exited the relay room and walked toward the old armory building. The cold outside had teeth, but it helped me think. Joanne was waiting in the hallway. She didn't say anything, just held out a small cardboard box. I found this in the attic, she said. From the year you left. I opened it on a bench in the corridor. Inside, papers, photos, a folded uniform patch, and tucked in the back, a marked-up draft of an old operation note. one I'd assumed lost years ago. It wasn't my handwriting in the margins. It was Jackson's. The ink had faded, but the message hadn't. She thinks she knows everything. I sat there for a long time, letting the silence thicken. Did he ever talk about Torchlight? I asked. Joanne didn't answer immediately. She sat beside me, slowly, deliberately, like her knees didn't trust her. He said you were reckless, that you left messes other people had to clean up. I nodded, not surprised. She traced her finger across a line of the report. Her eyes narrowed. This code, she murmured, tapping a sequence in the header metadata. It's a NATO-specific key. You only get this from briefings at level 6 clearance or above. I looked at her. And? Jackson only had level 3. Until last month. We stared at each other. In that moment, something in her face changed. Not shock. Not horror. Recognition. She'd seen this before. Not this exact betrayal, but the kind that simmers under ceremony and ribbons. Back in the control center, I rerouted the scan trail for the email upload. The original sender had gone through multiple dummy accounts, but the last active login was traced to an internal IP. It didn't come from an outside actor. It came from a device housed in the officer wing. Fort Liberty. Credential used? jgrant.sub.admin. I closed the laptop slowly. The air around me felt heavier, like the building itself was leaning in to listen. Joanne stood behind me. She had read enough to understand. This isn't a system glitch, she whispered, eyes on the screen. This isn't a mistaken code. She looked at me. This is personal. You weren't supposed to win, Jackson said. You weren't supposed to come back. His voice broke the silence like a match struck too close to dry leaves. We stood in the field behind the barracks, where the grass never quite grew back after winter drills. It was past midnight. The air bit clean, and the stars above felt indifferent. I hadn't meant to follow him out here, but something about the weight he carried as he left the task room told me this was it, the unraveling. He didn't look at me when he said it, just stared straight ahead, hands in his pockets, jaw clenched like a man holding back a scream. I didn't think you'd show up, he continued. I figured Mom's note would scare you off. It always did before. I didn't come back for her, I said. Or for you. He nodded, still facing away. I only meant to send something small. A snippet. I doctored a paragraph, rewrote a few things. Just enough to make you look messy. Not criminal. Just forgettable. The blog wasn't even mainstream. I figured it'd die in the background noise. But it didn't. No, he said. It lit a fuse I didn't know existed. Silence. He turned then, slowly and for once, looked at me. Not like a sibling, not like an opponent. Just a man unraveling. You have to understand, he whispered. You left. And they kept talking about you. Even when you weren't there. Every holiday, every promotion. Wonder where Maddie is now. She always had something special. I did everything right, and it still wasn't enough to shut your shadow out of my space. I didn't respond. What was there to say? He took a step closer. I didn't think the system would react. I didn't know there was a fault line still buried in those servers. I just wanted to win for once. To stand where you'd never return. You could have stood beside me, I said softly. He shook his head. That's not how this family works. I looked down at the grass, at our boots barely brushing the earth. You stabbed me in the back, I said. Not with a knife, with words. The kind I once taught you how to use. From the upstairs window, a soft shuffle. Joanne, her silhouette just visible behind the curtain. She didn't move, but the faint sound of breath catching gave her away. Jackson didn't notice. He collapsed onto the edge of a cement slab near the old shed. Shoulders bowed. Not crying, just emptying. I sat beside him. Not to comfort, just to be present. A chime broke the stillness, my secure line. I unlocked the phone. Alert, secure upload detected. Sobing 14 EST file. Type, level 4 classified, Operation Dagger. Destination, encrypted node, darknet. Redstream hub source device. Decommissioned terminal. Serial, Chakra SRV, Zavos 197. That terminal had been shut down 5 years ago. I tapped for audit trail. Last user, Lorne Stephen. The name hit like a memory I didn't want. Stephen Lorne, the man who tried to erase me, had returned to the last place no one watched. A dead bunker wired into a dying network. The tech maps called it Bunker 6 Bravo, a reinforced concrete husk buried behind Fort Liberty's obsolete signal compound. It hadn't been staffed in years, just occasionally swept for rodents and sealed again like a relic. But Lorne knew better than anyone that in the military, nothing ever really disappears. It just gets pushed into shadow. We moved in at 0300 under radio silence. No sirens, no lights. Just a 5-person strike team with thermal scanners and an override key I personally coded. Jackson came too, not because he had to, but because he needed to see where this led. Dead zone begins here, I told the squad, pointing at a patch of terrain behind the control fencing. No live surveillance, no beacons, no backup. We do this by breath and footstep. The team nodded. We'd all been here before, just in different countries. We breached the outer hatch in under 90 seconds. Inside, the air was metallic, thick with stale condensation and the hum of machines clinging to borrowed life. Dim emergency lights pulsed every 15 feet, revealing rusted panels and half-crushed cables like a skeleton without skin. He was waiting for us. Stephen Lorne sat in the command alcove, cross-legged on the floor, back straight like a man in meditation. The main console blinked softly beside him, lines of code scrolling with surgical precision. He didn't flinch when we entered, didn't run, didn't reach for anything, just looked up and smiled. "About time," he said. I signaled the team to secure the station. Lorne didn't resist when the restraints clicked around his wrists. He looked older, worn down by years in the corners of wars he helped plan but never stood inside. But his eyes were the same. Sharp, smirking, calculating. I knelt in front of him. "You used my brother?" He tilted his head. "I used what your brother left lying around. That's different. You engineered a breach using an old server that should have been dust." He grinned. "You know the thing about ghosts, Grant? They're only dangerous when people forget they were ever real." I didn't blink. "So you picked the one man still bitter enough to help erase me." He shrugged. "He didn't even know what he gave me. Just wanted to throw shade. I provided the sun." My hands tightened around the file I'd pulled from his upload trace. Layers of embedded code, viral protocol piggybacked on Jackson's forged email. Elegant, vicious, the perfect digital ambush. "You buried me before, once," I said. "You tried to scrub the Mosul operation just because I stopped you from shelling a civilian corridor." His smirk faltered. "Just for a second." "You humiliated me in front of NATO observers," he spat. "You made me look weak." "You were weak," I said. "And you still are. Because you can't build anything. All you know how to do is corrupt what's already standing." He leaned back against the wall, eyes closed, like he'd heard this sermon before. "I don't need to win, Grant. I just need you discredited. That's enough. Get you out of the room long enough for someone else to sit at the table." I stood. The team had secured the data nodes, extracted all records and relay logs. The breach would be contained now. The damage done, but not irreversible. Back at Fort Liberty's holding room, I sat across from him behind a reinforced glass wall. His hands rested on the steel table, calm, unbothered. "You don't get to unwrite me," I said. "Not again. The only way you win is if I stay silent." I leaned closer to the intercom mic, and I'm not silent anymore. He smiled. Not smug, not defeated, just amused. "You win," he said, almost kindly, "but they won't forgive your brother." I froze. He continued, slow and surgical. "The system needs someone to blame. You're too valuable now. But him? He's dispensable. His name's already in the report headers. You know how this works." I did. My throat felt tight. Outside the glass, Jackson sat alone in the debriefing hallway, head down, elbows on knees, waiting for something he hadn't yet earned and feared wouldn't come. "I'll sign it," Jackson said, voice tight, "even if it takes me 5 years to climb back." The conference room at Fort Liberty's command wing had been stripped of its usual pomp. No flags, no ceremonial placards, just white light, 4 chairs, and one long table scarred with too many briefings. I stood at the front with the task force summary on screen behind me. Slides annotated, data lines sharp, conclusions inarguable. "This wasn't a failure of protocol," I said. "It was a failure of intent, of trust. A single compromise, leveraged by a hostile actor, cascaded into a breach that nearly dismantled a decade of quiet service." Markham nodded slowly, arms crossed. He hadn't spoken much, only listened. Beside me, Jackson rose. His posture wasn't the same as it used to be. Shoulders straighter now, not from pride, but from weight. He laid the document on the table and pushed it forward. "My actions, however indirect, initiated the chain. I accept full accountability. I waive promotion eligibility for the next 5 years." No one interrupted. No one applauded. That silence, that restraint, felt like the only honest tribute this room could offer. Joanne's voice came next, smaller than I'd ever heard it. "I thought silence kept peace," she said. "I thought staying neutral meant loving both children equally, but it didn't. It just let the louder one fill the room." Her eyes glistened, but she didn't break. That, in itself, was her confession. Richard stood, slowly, like his spine remembered every year of command and regret. He looked at me, not past me, at me. "I thought you disappeared. But the truth is, I stopped looking. And then, one day, you stood up, and I saw everything I'd missed." No apology, but not a deflection either. Just a truth, laid bare. I let the moment hold. Then I turned to the screen again, resumed the final section of the report. "Remediation protocols are already in motion. The legacy servers have been purged. 2 new layers of endpoint monitoring are live. A joint team from Cyber Intel will review past red flag dismissals for systemic bias. And," I paused, "this won't happen again. Because now, someone's watching the parts we used to ignore." Markham finally stepped forward. "Thank you, General," he said, loud enough for the room to realign its focus. He looked at each of us in turn. "Justice doesn't mean perfection," he said. "It means pursuit. You chased it without letting it burn down the institution. That matters." Then he turned to me fully, jaw set with something that might have been admiration. "The floor is yours, General." I nodded. Brief. But I felt it deeper than any standing ovation I'd ever gotten. Not that I'd had many. As the room cleared, an officer in dress uniform approached me, envelope in hand. "Orders?" he said quietly. I opened it. A letterhead from the office of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. I skimmed. "You are hereby assigned to chair the National Strategic Symposium, Washington, D.C." The room faded for a second, just the background noise of shuffling boots and clipped conversations. I stared at the final line. Full discretionary authority on agenda. Theme: redefining integrity in modern warfare. I walked into the Pentagon through the front door, this time with a nameplate already waiting. It rested clean and level outside the auditorium doors. Major General M. Grant, Strategic Chair. Brass on black. No ceremony, just presence. Inside, the air held a different kind of charge, not electric, but expectant. A gathering of minds sharpened by decades of war, policy, and calculus. Over 500 officers, analysts, and foreign observers filled the rows in muted grays and blues, most of them too young to remember how shadows had once shaped the battlefield more than bullets. I didn't wear medals, just my uniform. Clean lines, no extras. As I stepped onto the stage, a hush fell, not out of awe, but uncertainty. The kind reserved for stories they'd heard in whispers, but never quite believed. My voice didn't waver. "I've never liked podiums," I began. "Too easy to hide behind." A pause. No laughter, just listening. In Operation Dagger, I overrode protocol. Intel suggested hostile presence in a village sector. Command wanted saturation sweep. I said no. I let that sit, then added, "There were children inside, 7. I had confirmation from satellite heat sigs and human intel." Somewhere in the crowd, a pen froze mid-note. I chose to delay assault. We rerouted. Extracted civilians first. We lost strategic momentum, yes, but we saved lives. A few heads nodded. Not agreement. Understanding. Afterward, I continued. I was flagged. Quietly. A review was launched. That's all it takes sometimes. A decision made with heart can be mistaken for compromise. I looked up, past the rows, to the back. Joanne watched from a remote feed. I knew it without seeing. She'd asked for the link. "In every room since then," I said, "I've heard some version of the same question. Was it worth it?" I scanned the crowd. I never hesitated then. I don't hesitate now. The job is not to win at any cost. It's to know which costs we should never pay. A hand raised. NATO's Director of Integrated Response. "Would you make that choice again?" "Every time," I said. No hesitation. The silence afterward wasn't still. It moved. Through glances exchanged, nods shared, thoughts shifting. I stepped back. I won't speak longer, because this story isn't just mine. I looked to the first row. "Lieutenant Jackson Grant," I said, "representing the next generation of strategic officers." He stood slowly, eyes wet, hands slightly trembling. He walked to the podium like a man unburdening, not by confession, but by clarity. "I was raised to believe honor is given," Jackson said, voice steady despite the storm behind it. "But today I learned. It's earned, especially from your sister." The folder had no title, just 3 hand-scribbled words: advance, survive, teach. It was already waiting on my desk when I arrived at the experimental strategy room. No email, no appointment, just paper and conviction. Inside, hand-drawn diagrams, unit flow sketches, red-inked maps of asymmetrical urban grids. The edges were uneven, corners curled. The whole thing looked like it had been folded, carried, refolded, and pulled out again in 100 late-night strategy sessions. There was no cover sheet, no rank, no header. But I recognized the structure. Every page followed a rhythm I'd seen before. Only once. The way assets were weighted against political thresholds. The moral flex built into every contingency. No absolutes, just pressure points and optional exits. It was mine. Or close. A younger version of it. Jackson stepped in quietly. He didn't salute. Didn't announce himself. Just walked across the room and stood near the edge of the table. "I didn't want to send it digitally," he said. "Didn't feel right." I nodded once. He pointed to the second page. "That bit? Where the urban ops units rotate out every 48 hours? That was from your Budapest review file, wasn't it?" My eyes flicked up. "You read that?" He shrugged. "I studied it." I didn't say anything. He kept going. "I started with your Candle Doctrine draft, then looked at your counter-proposal for Cyprus. I know it wasn't official, but I got the archived version through NATO's reserve portal. My fingers grazed the top edge of the folder. Jackson swallowed. I'm not trying to copy you. I'm just learning what I should have seen earlier. On the third page was a phrase circled in red ink. Moral terrain is the true battlefield. That one was mine, no doubt. I remembered writing it in 2003, after my first diplomatic failure in Cairo. The words had felt too raw then, too idealistic. But I'd left them in the margins anyway. Now they were at the center. I closed the folder and placed my hand over the front, ran my palm slowly across the cardboard like I was sealing something in, then picked up a black marker. In clean, deliberate strokes, I wrote, "Advance." Jackson exhaled, like he'd been holding something in since he dropped the file. "That's all I needed," he said, voice barely above a whisper. On the far table, my phone vibrated once. A letter, not digital. Joanne's handwriting, neat and old-fashioned. I opened it carefully. "I used to fear that light would erase you," it read. "But it turns out, you were never running from light. You were the one carrying it. I just couldn't see it through the fog I called protection." I folded the letter. Didn't speak. Jackson stood by the window now, watching the training fields. A group of junior officers were running drills across the yard, too far to hear, but I recognized the rhythm of coordination. The rise-fall of boots that hadn't yet known what it was to make the wrong call and live with it. He didn't look at me when he said, "The model's not perfect. I know that." I picked up the folder again. "It's not perfect," I agreed, "but it's a damn good start." "I set the table this time," I said. "I chose the seat. And yes, I'm keeping it." The dining room hadn't changed much in 20 years. Same dark oak table with that one warped leg, same faded wallpaper curling at the corners. The window still overlooked the eastern tree line like it had something to prove. But this time, the place settings were mine. 6 chairs, plates even. No name cards, but everyone knew where to sit. And for the first time, I sat at the head. Not at the corner, not near the kitchen, not in overflow. The head. The lasagna was simple. Store-bought noodles, scratch sauce, too much garlic. I didn't want it to impress. I wanted it to be mine. Joanne arrived first, quiet, carrying a bowl of salad already dressed. Richard followed, slower than I remembered, wearing the kind of shirt that once only came out for court-martials or weddings. Jackson came last, no uniform, no apology, just a 6-pack of non-alcoholic beer and a shrug that said, "Trying." We ate mostly in silence, the kind that doesn't bite, just breathes. Midway through the meal, Richard cleared his throat. Twice. Then looked down at his plate. "I think," he said softly, "this is the first time I've eaten something you cooked." I raised an eyebrow. "You used to say I'd burn cereal." He gave a small chuckle. "Maybe I deserve that." Joanne's voice came next, gentle, unsteady. "I used to think, those care packages you sent, back when we didn't write back, I thought they were apologies. Your way of saying sorry for leaving." I put my fork down. "They weren't apologies," I said. "They were reminders that I still existed." No one spoke, but no one looked away. The silence that followed didn't ache. It just settled. Like dust in sunlight. Not dangerous, just honest. After the plates were cleared, I stood. Went to the old bookshelf. The one still lined with outdated manuals, cracked frames, and a half-faded photo from a long-ago 4th of July barbecue. I pulled the photo out. The same one they'd once cropped. My body had been cut at the shoulder to fit the frame. That's what they'd told me. I held it for a long second, then walked back and set it down on the table. "I don't want you to replace this," I said. "Just take a new one." They looked up. "This time," I added, "everyone stands in frame. Joanne nodded slowly. Richard rose. No hesitation. He stepped to the sideboard, opened a drawer I hadn't touched in years, and pulled out the old Canon camera I'd once begged to use as a kid. He held it up, cleared his throat. "Grant family," he said, steady. "Formation, full strength." He was 23, voice cracking with nerves. "Ma'am, in war, what's the hardest part?" The classroom still smelled faintly of industrial floor wax and old military manuals. A faint hum from the fluorescents buzzed above our heads. Background noise, always. They called it non-traditional strategic response in asymmetric zones. The students just called it the Gray War class. I taught it once a month. Voluntary. Half of them didn't even take notes. The ones who stayed did it because something about the way I stood at the board made them feel like the answers weren't just theoretical. Today, I'd ended the session early. A quote from Operation Dagger still hung on the projection behind me. "Sometimes, leading means being the only one in the room who knows you're not winning, but stays anyway." The cadet's question came just as I was collecting my notes. "What's the hardest part?" he asked again, more softly this time. "In war, I mean." I set my pen down. The room went still. Even the ones who usually checked their phones or watched the wall suddenly turned. I looked him in the eyes. "It's not pulling the trigger," I said. "It's not watching a plan collapse." He waited. "It's surviving," I continued, "but not letting yourself turn into stone." A few pens twitched above paper, but no one moved to write yet. "You'll see things," I said, "lose people. And if you're not careful, you'll carve that grief into armor, and you'll forget what it was like to feel anything else. You'll convince yourself that numb is strong." I paced slowly. The real strength isn't shutting down. It's choosing to stay open. It's knowing your wounds aren't weapons. They're guides. They remind you what to protect, who to fight for. The cadet blinked rapidly, nodded. I watched it sink in. The lesson he didn't know he came for. Class dismissed. One by one, they trickled out. All but one. Jackson remained. He didn't speak. Just walked up to the front of the room and placed something on the desk. A small white box. No ribbon. Just frosting peeking through the edges of the lid. I opened it. Birthday cake. One slice. Frosted by hand. Messy. Sloped. But centered in blue icing were 3 deliberate words. General. Sister. Teacher. I didn't say anything. Didn't need to. Jackson gave a quiet nod and turned to go. I looked down at the box, then leaned back in my chair and smiled. Not because I was happy, but because I was finally at peace. There are no parades for people like me. Just the quiet knowledge. I was there. I mattered. The coffee had gone cold. Sunlight edged across the hardwood floor of the small DC apartment I now called home. Second story, no nameplate, just a worn brass number above the buzzer that stuck when pressed. The desk faced east. Morning light filtered through blinds, casting long shadows across a notepad covered in my handwriting. Simulation notes. Nothing urgent. On the corner of the desk sat an envelope, still sealed. Thin. Civilian. I picked it up, broke the flap without thinking. Inside was a clipped page from the Military Review, folded once. A headline in black serif font, imprint thinking, the quiet shift in asymmetric strategy. The first line read, "A once radical framework, long dismissed as emotional calculus, is now guiding the next generation of strategic officers, thanks to lessons drawn from the Dagger campaign." I scanned down. No byline, no photo, just a citation buried halfway down. Concept attributed to retired Major General M. Grant, Post-Dagger Doctrine, 2025. I folded the paper, set it on the shelf, not for display, just to keep it from getting creased. No frame, no ceremony. Outside, the world moved on. I could see the edge of the Fort Liberty training grounds from my window, cadets running drills, too young to have seen the things we buried in classified files. I watched one stumble, laugh, get up again. I smiled, not because of pride, but because I could. I poured fresh coffee, no sugar, sat by the window with my feet tucked under me like I used to as a child. There was no sound but the city beyond, buses exhaling at corners, someone playing jazz on a balcony across the street, and the low murmur of a world still turning. I didn't need more. The medals were in a drawer somewhere, the files locked in secure archives. The pain had softened, not disappeared, but stopped roaring. I spoke to no one in particular when I said aloud, "Justice doesn't always arrive with a gavel." I sipped once, felt the warmth travel down. "Sometimes," I continued, quieter now, "it's stepping out of the shadows, without asking permission." I left the cup half full, tied my hair back, and walked into the sun. She was once cropped out of every photo, her name a whisper buried under her family's silence. But when the truth stood tall in a room built to erase her, even shadows had to make way. Justice didn't roar. It arrived in quiet resolve, forged through years of erasure and one unshakable step forward. Like the final chord of a long-forgotten melody, it may come late, but once heard, it resonates forever. If this story moved you, like, share, and subscribe, and drop a comment. 1, if you felt seen, or 2, if you believe justice still has more to say.